Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar looking at past emergencies and future outlook. My name is Samantha Brangeon and I work for Groupe URD. Groupe URD, I'll tell you a bit more about it later, but it's a humanitarian think tank based in the south of France. Thank you very much to be here. The turnout has been really good so far, and we're very happy to have so many of you here from all around the world. This webinar will be the last webinar of a series looking at emergencies in the face of COVID. Over the past 6 months, we'll had 6 webinars, and each individual webinar is a standalone webinar. But this webinar is a wrap-up looking at past emergencies and future outlook. So welcome very much. We'll be together for 1 hour and a half. The panel is I'm gonna give you a bit of info, useful info. So we'll have 4 panelists today. Then we'll have a final Q&A session at the end, so you can type in your questions in the chat box, and please mention where you're from and type in your questions, and panelists will reply individually. This webinar, like the others, will be recorded, and you will receive a link to the webinar as well as a link to the feedback survey at the end. You'll also receive a link to the panel presentations, all the materials and the recordings also of the previous webinars. And those who attended 4 of the 6 webinars will also receive a certificate of attendance for the entire series. So the objective of this last webinar is to draw lessons learned from past emergency response with an environmental perspective, particularly in the face of COVID, and also to share experience and different point of view to learn collectively. We have a very rich panel today and a very diverse panel, so I'm sure the discussion will be very rich. Muralee, which I believe most of you know from UNEP, the Crisis Management Branch, will do some opening remarks, followed by Urs from the Swiss Agency for Development, who will provide his insight into his experience in emergencies and environments, followed by Esther from DG ECHO, who will provide an insight from the donor perspective, and finally Nichol from the private sector, who will give a case study of the oil spill response, followed by the Q&A session. Just a quick word about Groupe URD and the work that we're doing. So we're a humanitarian think tank. We do research, training, and evaluation. And I specifically work on the environment, the links between the environment and humanitarian crisis and humanitarian action. I support humanitarian actors in reducing their footprint. And I also facilitate the network of humanitarian organizations called the REH network, the Réseau Environnement Humanitaire. So I wanted to share with you some of our recent work. Next slide, please. Yeah, we've developed some eco-friendly posters, which are downloadable here. They're available in French and in English. You can post them in your offices. They're looking at quick wins for your organization to reduce their footprint, looking at emergency transport, project management, and purchasing and services. They're available in French and in English. Next slide, please. And also, I wanted to share with you 2 research which we've done recently. One is looking at the environmental implication of CVA, cash-based intervention, and another research funded by DG ECHO, which is a research looking at the environmental footprint of humanitarian action more general. Both these research are available in French and in English, and you can download them from clicking on these links. I just wanted to, before we begin, to give you a quick insight into our work and the findings of these research. And I wanted to share with you this drawing, which I came across with the other day. We've got a COVID crisis at the moment, which affecting all of us, which will be soon followed by economic recession. But in the background, there's a climate change crisis and the biodiversity collapse, which is even bigger and affecting all of us. And this crisis really calls upon our individual, collective, and organizational responsibility. There are no small action. Everybody can act in their individual life, but also in their professional lives. And but having said that, there is a need for to allocate resources, human and financial, for a greener humanitarian sector. And the latest IPCC report, I mean, I'm sure you all know this, but are really alarming, and there's a really need to act now and not to wait another decade. We've lost in the last 10 years of inaction, so there's really an emergency to act now. And also, the last point I wanted to make is that addressing environmental issues is also very much linked to our commitment as a humanitarian sector for a more localized response. And we've seen as a sector that we managed to adapt ourselves in this crisis and rely much more on our local partners and national partners. So it's really a lesson learned from us, I think, as a sector. Thank you very much. Without any further delay, I'm gonna give the floor to Muralee from UNEP, who's gonna give us some opening remarks. Hi, Muralee.
Thank you, Samantha, for your introduction. And I want to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining this event from. We have been conducting this series on environmental emergencies for past 6 months. And this is a program which we have conducted offline, person to person, for last many years before we decided to go online. And every batch, we used to have about 30 people attending those offline sessions. When COVID came, we had already planned to do a classroom session in India for about 30 people. But as that could not be done, we discussed internally as to what do we do. Do we postpone it to 2021 or do we do it online? And we decided that maybe we should make use of this opportunity and do it online. At that point of time, we said, if we are making it online, why do we make it geographically constrained? And why don't we make it open to the whole world? And even then, we had expectation that probably 100, 200 people would turn up, which is the typical number for a webinar. But our great surprise and delight, we had thousands of people signing up. And every webinar we conducted, in the end, had about 1,000, 1,300 people joining for the last 5 webinars. Today, we are coming to last of this webinar series. We had participation from 148 countries. And hundreds of those people have stayed with us all through this season. And a number of people wrote to us, such as Amla Babu from Abu Dhabi. She said she could not attend a certain event. So she watched the webinar, which was then put on YouTube. And she said, could she be eligible for continuing with the series? And we said yes, because our objective is not to be exclusive, but to be inclusive. The more people join, the better it is. Today, we are coming to the end of the series, and we'll be talking about the lessons learned and some of the future events. But I'm also extremely happy that even though this is happening at the time of a second wave in Europe, humanity has also conquered COVID, at least as the Director General of WHO said, it is at least possible to dream about the end of this crisis. We have a vaccine. The vaccine will take time, but at least it's possible to dream about the end of this COVID crisis. But as I said, COVID, even though it was a huge setback, also taught us many things. The ability to conduct online training, the ability to reach out globally, was clearly one of them. When we were talking about environmental emergencies in the beginning, we were talking primarily about emergencies of an environmental nature, such as an industrial accident, such as oil spill. But very soon, we realized that almost any emergency would have an environmental footprint, be it an earthquake, be it flood, be it tsunami. Each of them would have an environmental footprint. Tsunami, for example, would turn almost everything in its path to debris. So dealing with those disaster debris would be a major environmental crisis. A flood, for example, going into industrial area would wash out the chemicals and spread it all over the region, contaminating soil. So flood, primarily a hydraulic disaster, would turn into an environmental disaster. So when COVID came, most people thought it's a health emergency. What could be environmental about it? But very soon, we figured out that even COVID have environmental challenges associated with it, such as the management of the hundreds of thousands of tons of COVID-linked healthcare waste which is generated. 73 million people have contracted the COVID virus. Every patient in hospital every day would produce an equivalent of anything from 1 to 3 kilograms of healthcare waste. It includes the discarded PPE from the healthcare workers. So you can imagine the amount of healthcare waste which has been produced during COVID crisis. But not only, COVID also created a huge setback to the entire effort of plastic ban around the world. As the amount of takeaway food increased, the amount of online shopping increased, the amount of waste and plastic waste in particular produced increased dramatically. And we have to deal with that as well. So what I'm saying is that even a health disaster, a health emergency, would have its environmental footprint. And we have to have ways to deal with it. Now, as I said, we are coming towards the end of the COVID crisis. By middle of next year, we would have at least gained upper hand over this. But even as the COVID crisis was blowing in full steam, we had to deal with other emergencies. There was no holiday for other emergencies as COVID came on stream. In August, we had the explosion in Beirut. And our colleague, Margarita, whom you know, was deployed to deal with that emergency. Between July and August, we had the oil spill in Mauritius. This also we had to deal with. We had the usual hurricane season, which is still ongoing and caused massive damage in Central America. So environmental emergencies will continue to happen, even while other emergencies, such as COVID, is prevailing. As per the slide shown by Samantha, you would have noticed, COVID would appear larger than life at this point in our life, because that's the biggest show in town. But that's really not the biggest show in town. There are other things on the horizon: climate change, biodiversity loss. So the things which we studied now in the series of environmental emergencies will have application in years to come. We are concluding this series now, but we'll be coming out with new webinars. COVID will end, but the webinar series will continue. So please stay with us. Thank you for staying all through these sessions, and look forward to a good webinar. Back to you, Samantha.
Thank you. Thank you, Muralee, for setting the scenes for us. Thank you very much. I'm not gonna give the floor to Urs from the Swiss Development Agency. Urs has tremendous experience in the field, looking at environmental and emergency, and he will provide his personal thoughts on the lessons learned and future directions. Up to you, Urs.
Thank you very much, Samantha. And thank you very much, Joint Unit, for inviting me to this very interesting webinar. So I will make first some introductory remark, then that you also can better understand my comments. So first, it's a great pleasure for me to talking to this audience. My presentation will be based on my experience as environmental expert working in humanitarian operation, and I will maybe focus my thoughts, my recommendation on the collaboration of the Joint Unit. The first contact I had with the Joint Unit was in the aftermath of the Pakistan earthquake, where I did a joint mission with an UNTAC member. I had then later on several occasions to more closely work with the Joint Unit when I was leading the STC expert group on environment and DRR. And also, I'm also participating in the advisory group on environmental emergencies, which is advising and giving strategic direction to the Joint Unit on behalf of the Swiss government. So I think, again, what is important to see, my coming thoughts are really personal. Don't take them than an exhaustive and objective evaluation. It's rather some food for thinking on one or the other aspect. I will, in the coming slides, I will first give some a look back on the past operation. I will then speak on some trends, and I will end with some suggestion for future direction. So all over the year I was working with the Joint Unit, I was really impressed. I have to say that by the great commitment of this small unit, which was very efficient. And I think also, secondly, what was very important, their high professionalism in their coordination, mainstreaming, and also in their technical expertise, for example, by providing training, etc. I think what is certainly how I see it, what was also a positive point is, especially during the last few years, probably also supported by the joint initiatives launched by USAID, the coordination between environmental and humanitarian actors become, I think, smoother. And the actors started to know each other. And I think compare this to probably 10 years back, so it's a great change. And very positively also, I think, is the recent collaboration from the Joint Unit with the UNEP network, with their regional environmental advisor, because this gives us the opportunity to have a more regional approach. And I will come back to this aspects later on in the future direction. And finally, maybe at the point, I think we were struggling with environment since I started working in humanitarian operation. But what I have seen also during the last years, I have the feeling that environment is more accepted by humanitarian actors. They see more easily the importance of the environment for the resilience and for the livelihoods of the affected communities. So also to understand maybe the role of environmental emergencies, all of the Joint Unit, when the Joint Unit started 25 or 26 years back, I think most of the environmental emergencies were really environmental emergencies linked often to hazardous material, like the Lebanon oil spill, like tsunami Fukushima. But also during the last, maybe since 5-6 years, the scope has been widened up, and additional environmental issues has been considered, as you know, with, for example, prevention related to disaster risk reduction, natural resource management in large refugee camps, energy issue, climate change, of course. I could even say biodiversity and conservation. And I think this broaden up of the scope has also increased the challenge that environmental issues are recognized by the whole humanitarian community. And probably also what makes the collaboration more difficult to address environmental issues was certainly also the setup of the cluster approach in 2005, where environment was defined as cross-cutting issues. What makes the work then very difficult, the practical work as an expert, very difficult in the field in large crisis, because you had to work almost with all the different clusters, what was not possible. And also on the other side, I think from the joint unit, but also from the other environmental actors, I think we launched quite a large environmental mainstreaming program to convince the humanitarian actors about the importance of environmental issues. In the context of that, I think it's also for us environmental experts, I think it was also to be accepted by the humanitarians, it was very important for the language we were using it. For example, I give you an example. When we were talking to humanitarians, how many trees have been cut in the surrounding of a large camp, I think this is probably counterproductive, or it could be counterproductive. We should rather talk the language that what is the impact of the cutting of all these trees for their livelihoods and the resilience of the local communities. And then I think the humanitarians understand much more easier the necessity to do it, to consider environmental issues. I think also regarding environmental assessments, I think a lot of work has been done also in the recent years with different tools, which has been elaborated, environmental markers from UNEP in general from different organizations, the greening of the operation, the NEAT assessment tools. But I think what I was a little bit missing is probably we were not too much focusing on the impact of the disaster on the environment and the livelihood of the affected people. And I will come back to these aspects later on in the future direction. There's another element, maybe linked to what I just said. I think I give you an example from some of my mandates mission I was involved, and this is from the. I think I had the challenges I had in these missions was to get access to relevant information for some topical issues, and it was not easy to be in one of these operations and to get the necessary contact with other experts, having this knowledge or having access to case studies, to best practice. For example, when I was after the Hurricane Matthew in Haiti, there was a lot of discussion how to reuse the fallen timber. There was the question, should we use a mobile chainsaw? Knowing that when we're using chainsaw, that maybe there's also a risk that this chainsaw will be used to cut the few remaining trees on Haiti. Or another topic was what to do with the biomass. Should we start to do charcoal, knowing that making charcoal is forbidden in Haiti? So coming to the Bahamas after the Hurricane Dorian, there were questions. There was a lot of dry wood lying around, and there is a risk when all this wood, all this biomass become dry. There were, according to me, there was a huge fire risk. But it was for me very difficult to address this issue, maybe also because it was new. It was also difficult to address this issue with the Bahamian authorities. And again, it was difficult to find other, maybe also academia, other experts who can support you, who can make a kind of a peer review to come up with the most appropriate technical decision. Or another point was the question of sorting of the biomass. Should we sort the biomass on the spot, or should we bring it to a central collection point? So all this makes it completely different. And I think the feeling I had in this kind of missions, we have very little report, you know, from a community of other experts to find together very quickly the appropriate solution. And maybe the last example I will give you, we started, we started in 2017, SDC together with UNHCR, we started restoration, a pilot restoration project in Chad, in the surrounding of Sudanese refugee camps. And in this approach, we promoted the use of assisted natural regeneration. But it was what is quite new, what is completely also different than to do an afforestation with tree planting. And there also it was difficult, even if we tried to have other actors interested in that approach and maybe also to support us. So it was not that easy. And I think I give you all these elements also to think that maybe also in future, I think we should probably also improve the technical mitigation measures that we recommend in some of the large disasters. Okay, just very briefly, I think we have the chance now with the joint unit that we can hopefully launch applied research project with the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva. They are interested via their program they have, via their capstone research projects, to make an impact evaluation of the 26 years of the joint unit's work. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity. And we have not yet, set up the research. What you see here are just some suggestions for the research questions we want to bring to the community of master students. So in any case, if you are interested, that would be very good later on if you could contribute to this evaluation, because I think what we generally missing, especially in the humanitarian field, I think we are not doing systematically evaluation, and I think in this case we can certainly learn by evaluating in a more comprehensive way the last 25 years what could be our future direction. I come now just to a few trends. I'll be quite quick on that, because I think everybody is aware of it. I think you see on these slides that the natural disaster are have been quite increasing during the last years, and I think what we certainly can expect related to climate change, that the weather-related events will certainly increase. So what means the drought will be more important, the flooding will be also more frequent, and so on. And on the other side, regarding population displacement, I think what we have seen in the last year with the increase of refugees and IDPs, and I think also again related to weather-related natural disasters, especially also drought, population displacement will most probably be even more important. And a last slide for the trends is on the zoonotic diseases, and I think thank you, Muralee, that you have stressed different aspects of the impact of these kind of diseases. And I think also there we have to expect that zoonotic diseases will increase in future due to ongoing forest degradation, deforestation linked with human expansion, and thereby bringing the humans thereby increasing the pressure, the pressure, thereby increasing the risk that sorry for that, that the human they will get more zoonotic diseases by their contact with the wildlife. And I think on the other points, Muralee has already mentioned different aspects. I think also when we're looking back for 22, I think also what I have the feeling that we were very lucky that we had not a new large disaster, because I think it would have been very difficult logistically and for deployment of humanitarian staff to do effective response. So I think we were quite lucky in 2020. I will end now to give you 3 points for future direction. What I think are these suggestions are not at all exhaustive. I don't know. It is just maybe I was. Francesco, can you go back one slide? No, now the next slide, please. Okay, sorry for that. So I was just selecting 3 points. I think we discussed this many times. It's not the first time, but I come back to the need. It is on the other side. Sorry, the capacity building. I think the capacity building we should do more in humanitarian operations, and I think one positive element was formerly under the joint unit, we had a network of national focal points representing disaster-prone countries. And I think even probably if it was not all the time working very well, but I think we should think about if we could not reactivate this network, because in the mid-run, in the long run, the disaster-prone countries, they should play a more prominent role in the response after a disaster. And we can not only achieve this if we support also the national and the local capacities. And I think also what I have seen in all the mission I participated, and I tried all the time to involve other organizations and involve also other national and local experts. But what I have to say, we are not doing this systematically, and I think we have to reconsider to enhance the national and local capacities. Next slide. This is my last slide. The next point, in principle, I have already said it. I think we should again maybe come back to the discussion. What are the best practices? What are the best technical practices which we should promote in humanitarian crisis from the environmental side? And the last point, I think it's also for most of you, I think it is also you are very familiar with this, with the nexus, the collaboration between humanitarian development and peace actors. I think for us from the environmental side, also because environment per se has its mid-term, long-term thinking, we should from our side also enhance, promote this promotion, this collaboration with these actors. But because only with this we can sustain the humanitarian activities beyond the recovery phase. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Urs, for this fascinating presentation. I completely agree with you with a lot of the points that you mentioned, the excellent work of the GAU in the past years, and also the fact that both environmental and humanitarian sectors are getting closer, despite the fact that they speak different languages. I think it's really encouraging to see that. Thank you. Now I'm gonna give the floor to Esther El Haddad from DG ECHO, and she will talk about the emergency response and expertise of the EU Civil Protection Mechanism. Welcome, Esther.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, colleagues, for inviting me here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody around the globe. Very grateful to be here to represent the European Commission, DG ECHO, the Director General of Humanitarian Aid and Civil Protection Operations, and the Emergency Response Coordination Center. Just a few words about it worked. A few words about what civil protection and humanitarian aid is. Under DG ECHO, so humanitarian aid and civil protection were brought under the same roof. Many of you know DG ECHO as a major donor. So really in terms of programming and policy development, we have a strong presence in the field and more than 200 humanitarian partners. However, DG ECHO also has another hat, which is the hat of a coordinator or facilitator of coordination in the field of civil protection. So civil protection, governmental aid delivered in the aftermath of a disaster. What is the EU Civil Protection Mechanism? The EU Civil Protection Mechanism here, first and foremost, is an expression of solidarity between member states which have the responsibility to support other disaster-affected member states and participating states when requested. Again, it is governmental assistance, so it could be in the form of in-kind, it could be in the form of experts, it could be in the forms of team and equipment, so what we call capacities, so they come as a group. Delivered in the aftermath of a disaster. Who is part of the mechanism? As you can see off the slide, is EU member states, Iceland, Norway, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Serbia and Turkey, and the UK until the end of this year. I would just like to here pinpoint, emphasizes that the Commission is a facilitator. So we have a support function to the member states, a support competence. So it's the member states and the participating states who pull together their resources to tackle their emergencies, and we are coordinating this from Brussels, from the Emergency Response Coordination Center. Three dimensions of the civil protection mechanism that you are, sorry, I went too quickly. 3 dimensions of the mechanism that you are familiar with. I will focus primarily on response in this presentation, but it's just to highlight that the whole disaster management cycle is incorporated into the mechanism. I've mentioned already a few times the ERCC, and throughout the presentation, so how is the mechanism, so our EU civil protection mechanism activated? I will mention a few times in the presentation an activation, a number of activations. I'll go through a bit the statistics. So what happens is that when there is a disaster affected country, we need to receive what we call a request for assistance. It needs to come from the national authority or from the UN. So you will see later that we've received several requests for assistance from the UNEP Joint Environmental Unit. This request is received in Brussels at the Emergency Response Coordination Center and is then distributed or shared with the members of the mechanism, the member states and participating states. We then liaise with the affected country and send in-kind assistance and in-kind assistance experts teams depending on what the needs is. And often we also send an EU civil protection team, which its role is to facilitate the coordination of the EU response for the affected country not to be overburdened with the assistance coming in the country. All this is done in the ERCC, the Emergency Response Coordination Center in Brussels, where we work 24/7. As you know very well, that natural disasters do not have office hours. They do not work from 9 to 5. And once visits are allowed again, post-corona, please feel free to contact us if you are ever in Brussels to have a look at the center. A bit of the statistics, you can see that this year, 2020, has been quite special for many of us. You can see on the graph that between 2007 to 2019, there was an average of 20 activations per year. While you see that for 2020, we have over 100 activations so far. 58 of those were requests related to COVID, requests for medical and in-kind assistance. Also requests for consular support. So there were 27 of them, which is when the mechanism was activated as a last resort for consular support when there were very little or no commercial transport available. So in total, we've brought back 100,000 people stranded across the world on over 400 flights. Echoing Urs and also Muralee, there was no large-scale disaster this year. However, there were still a few emergencies going on. The disasters did not stay confined at home. So you can see on the graph on the right some tropical cyclones, floods, and for example, the first one is the accident, which is the explosion in Lebanon, which for us was the first deployment amid the COVID emergency. Just a different way of visualizing the information that all the requests for assistance were coming a little bit globally from all around the world. Many red, so COVID-related requests, but also non-COVID related requests as well, which represents 15% of the activations. With regards to the hazard evolution, just to highlight that it's only again related to the number of activations we've received in the mechanism, and this is followed since 2007. So you can see that despite the very high number of activations related to the outbreak, you can see that unfortunately fires and floods are still very much in the lead. And here we all know about the effect of climate change and the increase in trends, most notably in the mega fires in Australia and the Amazon, California, etc. So here it's been you can really see basically the risk associated with these extended periods of hot and dry weather. You can, I don't know if it's too small, but you can see that there are some activations just related to the environment. However, we should, as also Muralee mentioned at the beginning, it's the secondary effects of natural disasters. So following, for example, tropical cyclone Dorian in the Bahamas, we deployed 2 oil spill experts together with the Joint Environmental Unit. Also, Margarita and myself were also deployed there. That actually came in after the initial response. With regards to the number of missions and experts deployed, you can see that for 2020, we've somehow only had 15 experts deployed. This is related to the mission in Lebanon, where we deployed 1 civil protection team. You can see in 2016, 2019 was also a very high number of experts deployed. 2016 was mostly an advisory mission to Ukraine, tropical cyclone Matthew in Haiti, Ecuador, some floods in Europe, and then in 2019 mostly Albania, earthquakes in Albania, the forest fires in Bolivia and Guatemala, Mozambique. So where we deployed a high number of experts and also a rotation of teams. On the graph on the right, you will see that many of the technical experts that are deployed are most of them are environmental experts or somehow related to the environmental expertise. And here we work very closely with the Joint Environmental Unit as well to map the kind of profiles that we need and that are often requested, to be able also to see how to adapt the trainings accordingly. Just a clarification on the numbers of experts here, it's only the numbers of experts deployed under the EU Civil Protection Mechanism, but as an EU Civil Protection team. So the number of experts deployed as capacities, so with experts and equipment, are not included in these slides. So for example, for Lebanon, one EU environmental expert was deployed along with a waste management expert, and then they also work very closely with the UNDAC team, with Margarita and the Environmental Emergency Coordination Cell. We are very grateful for the cooperation with the Joint Environmental Unit. You can see 30 environmental experts deployed since 2014. However, so also not limited to response, but also in preparedness. So actually, DG ECHO supports the environmental and the training called Environmental and Emergencies Training, which is actually organized by the Joint Environmental Unit, and which I will just have a bracket here to really thank them for the excellent job, and looking forward to building on this cooperation in the next years. But again, not only related to deployment and training, but also for the moment we do not have this remote deployment option for us in the mechanism. However, we work very closely with the Joint Research Center and the Copernicus Emergency Management System to be able to support environmental expertise in the field. So for example, the JRC, the Joint Research Center, has already conducted 7 different studies, the latest for El Cajon map in Honduras related to dam assessments. Cannot move the slide. Francesco, can you help me? That's okay. I will not spend too much time on this slide. It's just a snapshot of the different advisory missions that we have. I'm sorry for the jumping. For the different advisory missions that we've conducted under the EU Civil Protection Mechanism. So we call prevention and preparedness missions, which also many of them address the environmental dimension of the emergencies and the aftermath of a disaster. Notably, for example, Ukraine, where it was for risk assessment on the Solotvio salt mine, for Portugal with regards to forest fire, Ecuador as well. So it's just to give you a bit of a broader picture of the missions that we conduct in the mechanism. In terms of future outlook, I've already touched upon deployment and training. What we've been doing now, and as a best practice in a way, we've been systematically including environmental experts into our EU civil protection team as a no regrets basis. So, for example, the last mission to Lebanon, we had an environmental expert and a waste management expert, which was not the case in previous years. We continue the training, the cooperation with the GEU. For us, it's important for the EU experts to be aware about the UN emergency response system, but also vice versa. I mean, for colleagues who deploy to the field under the UN or under other organizations, for you to know about the mechanism and the EU experts, because you will meet in the field. So for us, this is important, and we continue working on the mapping of the profiles and the expertise. In terms of capacities, we have some environmental assessment units and CBRN units that are available in the European Civil Protection Pool, which is, in very simple terms, just a pool of pre-committed assets which we can deploy more easily in a more systematic manner when there is an emergency. As a future outlook, actually as part of the European Reinforced and Strengthened component, you may have heard of the RescEU component. The CBRN capacities primarily have also been identified as one of the priorities, along with the aerial forest fighting means and medical capacities. What does this mean as having a CBRN capacity part of rescue is that if there are no national capacities available, nor capacities from the EU Civil Protection Pool, then these RescEU CBRN capacities could be deployed as an additional safety net from the mechanism. In terms of flexibility, we've seen now, with COVID that we really need to adapt. We really need to adapt to the different situations. For Lebanon was the first deployment amid COVID-19 pandemic. So also related to the previous point I mentioned about remote deployment, which is not something we are doing at the moment, but voilà, this is for us to work on in the future. And then cross-sectoral cooperation, also it's not something new. However, we've really had a big challenge, at least in the ERCC throughout the mechanism and with COVID, because there were different ministries involved, and not only our contact points in civil protection, but ministries of health, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Interior, which most of them are our civil protection contact points. And this is important for us to strengthen. Also, echoing also Urs when he mentioned the network of national focal points, it also could be a way of really making sure that we all work together in cross-sectorial manner. Also linking back to session 2 at how environment is not, I mean, there is really a challenge in environmental coordination, because environment is not a sector by itself per se, it's quite cross-cutting. So this is for us to think about and to be discussed for our in the future outlook. And then finally, looping back, wearing the DG ECHO hat as a humanitarian donor, DG ECHO has recently adopted an ambitious approach to reduce the environmental footprint of humanitarian aid operations. This is in line with the principles of the European Green Deal. So for us, it's not only about environmental protection, but it's also increasing the resilience affected by the populations. So here we work very closely with the Groupe URD and the GEU on these, and of course our humanitarian partners. So we look forward to greening humanitarian aid. It's very difficult to to give a very comprehensive overview in 15 minutes, but these are some useful links for you if you would like to go on and read a bit more. Please feel free to have a look and contact me if you have any, contact us if you have any questions. This is it from my side. Thank you very much for your time. I think with the evident impact of climate change, it seems that we'll still be very busy. So yeah, we know we can count on each other, and we can tackle the environmental dimension of emergencies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther, for shedding the light on this type of work of the European Union. It was certainly not something that I knew much about, so thank you very much for that. I just wanted to remind you that we're going to send out all the materials and the links, so don't worry if you've missed out Esther's last slide here. Now I'm going to introduce you to Andy Nichol from the Oil Spill Response Limited. We're very happy to welcome him on this panel. I think as a humanitarian sector, we don't talk to the private sector enough, and I'm really happy that today we can hear what the private sector has to say. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you very much, Samantha. And yeah, on behalf of Oil Spill Response, it's a great pleasure to be invited to join this webinar this afternoon. And many thanks to colleagues at the JEU for inviting us to be here and to talk to you this afternoon. So I'd just like to briefly introduce the company I work for, Oil Spill Response Limited, and talk about prevention, preparedness, and primarily response, which is the cornerstone of what we do as a company. Talk about the impact of COVID-19 on our work, and finish up with some future trends and some final thoughts. So Oil Spill Response is a industry-owned cooperative. This is our 35th year, and I've been there for quite a few of those years, more than half of those years. We are a cooperative that's owned by major oil and gas production and transportation companies. We have a large membership of energy companies, but also includes some public companies, government agencies, as well in our membership, and we provide resources for responding to oil spills. And amongst our resources, as well as equipment and hardware, perhaps our most important resource is the people. And we have 275 people working across 9 bases globally, about half of which are operationally trained or have an operational background, and the other half provide preparedness services, management functions, and other support to the core business of the company. So the holy trinity then of prevention, preparedness, and response. Prevention, as it says there, is better to not have a spill than to clean one up. And we have another saying that $1 spent on prevention is worth $100 spent on response. And I think that's very true for our members who are very focused on preventing oil spills wherever and whenever they happen. But that's just one side of the coin, and clearly preparedness and response is just as important. And so that will be the focus of my talk this afternoon, is on preparedness and response. So this rather complicated picture is what I describe as the sort of the hamburger diagram to explain preparedness, if you like, the whole process of preparedness. And somebody once cleverer than me said that the purpose of making a plan is not so much to get it right, but to choose the direction of travel. So this diagram, this hamburger diagram, illustrates the sort of planning process, if you like, and starts with the filling of the risk analysis, understanding what's at risk. So whether you're talking about a platform or a facility or a port or even a whole country, it's important to begin the planning process by understanding what's at risk from oil spills. And to do this, modelling can help, sort of stochastic or probabilistic modelling, and sort of knowledge of what oils are transported and what are carried, and also what sensitivities knowing your risks, you can then develop response strategies for certain scenarios, including the worst case scenario, as well as more regular sort of operational spills that happen from time to time. Then the dartboard on the right illustrates can we go back? The dartboard on the right of the slide illustrates the 15 areas of capability which can be called into action in a tiered structure, sort of for a response. And tiered is very important because you want to be able to activate local resources, local capability, regional, and then ultimately international and national resources from government and industry, which is what that diagram on the right depicts. Now, the bread roll, if you like, the sandwich outside of the filling is the training and exercising and the stakeholder engagement that goes through this whole planning process. No one organisation can plan for an oil spill in isolation, so it's very important throughout the process of developing plans for response is that you involve stakeholders who are going to be involved in the response or impacted by the event in one way or another. So moving on to response then, accurate assessment is absolutely crucial. And I think traditionally, we use modelling and aircraft surveillance to help us understand what's happening in a very dynamic situation at sea. Primarily, where is the oil? How is it behaving? Where is it going? And what can we do about it? Nowadays, we've got a whole range of more sophisticated technology at our fingertips with the use of satellite surveillance, drones, and in fact, the challenge may now be more about how do we strategically use all of these different platforms to get the right information to the decision makers at the right time, and we don't overload the decision makers with too much extraneous noise and information. Mobilization then, we have a spill and it's time to act. And so a couple of mantras that our members use are about prudent overreaction or the need to get big quick. Either way, we're looking for a proactive response. And it's better to start early and turn off resources that you don't need than it is to delay the response and then subsequently build up. And that timeline at the bottom reflects back to a real spill that happened a few years ago off the coast of West Africa, where a spill happened on a platform and the offshore installation manager was not sure how much oil had been spilled at the time. So there was a delay overnight for 12 hours until they realized that actually there was quite a significant spill. And then the whole process of notification, assessment, and activation decision took place. But the problem is, all of this time, the oil is spreading and it's becoming more difficult to deal with. So the key message here is to prudently overreact, get big quick, as it says, and escalate the mobilization on a no regrets basis, such that we can bring our resources to bear more effectively. Regarding response operations, people traditionally think of booms and skimmers as an effective way to treat oil, and they do have their place for sure. I think booms are more effectively used in a defensive mode, protecting identified sensitive resources. But as the slide says, it takes time to deploy equipment. They do spread quickly, and oil types and weather are key factors that make oil spills particularly unpredictable. I think people often think of booms and skimmers as a really effective way, but actually one of the problems we have is the encounter rate, and because oil spreads very thin over a very wide area of sea surface, it's actually quite difficult to practically contain and collect that oil. And these problems are compounded by bad weather, and so what we have seen and what we have learned from previous incidents is that lots of small operations with small vessels can often be more effective than large dedicated response vessels, which can be slow to mobilize. But just a sort of salutary message there on the bottom of the slide is that during Macondo, the Deepwater Horizon spill in the Gulf of Mexico, 2010, there were over 8,000 vessels of opportunity engaged in that response, all of which needed to be coordinated and given direction and sort of cleaned after the event. So there's a huge logistical and coordinative effort required to command and control these assets. Another response technique in our toolbox is the use of dispersants. These are surface active agents which, when mixed with the oil, enable the oil to be sort of created in small droplets that are suspended in the water column. And this is much more amenable to the natural process of biodegradation, which typically takes place. So we find this is one of the most effective tools. However, it does require some pre-planning, and there are some 4 fundamental questions that have to be answered before dispersant can be deployed. Firstly, is it possible? Are we acting within the window of opportunity? Because as the oil weathers, thickens as it's on the sea surface, it will come to a point where dispersant is no longer effective. Will it be beneficial? Are we going to have the impact mitigation kind of effect that we want to see to protect sensitive resources? Is it feasible? Have we got aircraft or vessels or other means to apply the dispersant directly onto the oil surface? And is it allowed? Are we in compliance with policy or regulations? And I think this is a key area, and we still find that many countries around the world do not have a policy in their national contingency plan on dispersant use. And this is a concern, because at least if we have a policy, we know where we stand and we can think about other tools that may be more applicable. But having no policy leads to delay in the decision making, which gives us problems. Can finally talk about shoreline cleanup, and this may be a chosen strategy. You may allow the oil to come ashore in areas where you can physically remove it, or it may be an inevitable consequence of a large spill close to shore. Either way, it tends to be the case that the emergency is now over, and we're looking at project management to try and control the situation, and we want careful physical intervention so that we don't make a bad situation any worse. So it all comes down to good planning, good organisation. It's very labour intensive, and one of the challenges with shoreline cleanup is to know when to stop. When is treatment complete? Because, you know, to remove the last stains of oil can be quite aggressive in terms of physical intervention, and that may be detrimental to the overall aim of reducing the impact on the environment. I want to mention quickly about volunteers, and if you look at the photograph on the right of the slide, this is a picture from Exxon Valdez 30 years ago now. And this guy's wearing a sandwich board, and it says, "Native Alaskan, hire me or I will throw myself to the sea lions and it will be all your fault." Now, these days, you know, sort of concerned community people and volunteers do not need to resort to sandwich boards. They use social media. And we saw a great example of this during the Wakashio incident in Mauritius most recently. And we saw that, well, we know that Facebook and Twitter, etc., they're designed to trigger human emotional reactions. And what could be more emotional than an oil spill? We saw in that event how these platforms are used to rally support behind community initiatives, to get folks involved and to take action in a variety of forms. Some are beneficial, but unless that action is coordinated and effectively managed, then where does the liability lie when something goes wrong? These volunteers are likely not trained, not supervised, and may end up causing more environmental damage or worse than through the official coordinated response efforts. We cannot stop the well-intentioned users of social media coming together to initiate uncoordinated cleanup efforts. So all we can do is to hope to manage this sort of resource and embrace the media as effectively as we can. Brief word on waste, and just to say, don't overlook this. This can be one of the biggest problems in an oil spill. People typically want to rush to respond, to collect, to pick up the oil, but the volumes of waste that can be entrained within recovered oil, be it PPE, dead animals, all sorts of jetsam and flotsam and other materials that typically get stuck with the oil, can dramatically increase the volumes of waste that are generated. But if you've got nowhere to put the waste, then this can stop the whole response. So sometimes this gets overlooked at the beginning of a spill, but my message today is don't overlook this, and start thinking about this, certainly at the planning stage. But when a response happens, we need to dedicate some resources to dealing with the waste that will be generated from day one. I'm going to talk about COVID now, and clearly this has had a global impact on many aspects. One of the things that struck me is about the impact on the risk of spills. We've been concerned for some time about seafarers stuck on ships, cannot get repatriated, and I'm hearing stories of seafarers been on ships now for 10, 11 months. Because of the transport links to their home country, sometimes, or they cannot be relieved. Sometimes they're stuck on ships for longer periods than they ever intended. And this potentially leads to a lack of focus on safety, safe operations. And although there's no direct correlations, we are seeing a worrying number of incidents this year, marine accidents or involving ships where perhaps the focus on safety has not always been there. So yeah, no direct causal sort of link yet, but there are some worrying trends that we're watching with caution at the moment. I think as regards response, restrictions, lockdown restrictions that we're already well familiar with will prevent and are preventing personnel movement. So in OSRL, we've been looking at how we can react to this and how we can use virtual platforms to command and control incidents, so that we don't have to all come together in a command center. And there are some good advantages to doing this, but also some limitations as well. And you still need to have a physical on-site response as well. It's also causing some of our members to renew their focus on mutual aid support arrangements, recognizing that rather than bring in expertise and capability from outside a country, if they can lean on their stakeholders and other oil companies in a country for support to manage an incident, then there are ways and means of getting around some of the lockdown restrictions that may apply. Finally then, just a couple of future and actually current trends that we're aware of. Spills are becoming less frequent. That's a good thing, but the double edge to that sword means that we need to have more focus on preparedness, because with skill fade and the fact that spills don't happen very often, it does mean that we might take our eye off the ball in terms of being prepared. Another factor is that marine fuels in particular are evolving, and IMO 2020 has seen a great range of different fuels now in ships designed to meet the requirements of the sulfur reduction cap for burning fuels. But when these oils are spilled in an accident, as we saw in Wakashio in Mauritius, they do behave differently. So it's very important that we understand the characteristics of new oils. I've mentioned also about the social media and impact of fake news that we've seen, particularly again in Wakashio. And thinking about what does effective spill response look like? Well, I don't think it's going to be a new skimmer or a new boom. I think the future of effective spill response is about accurate real-time situational awareness, good organization, good cooperation, and how do we manage all of the huge volumes of data and information that will be created. Last slide, and just some final thoughts. Mentioned about encounter rate. Typically we have 1 or 2 days to get in control. I think the general public and populations understand that accidents do happen, but they expect them to be managed effectively. So success is all about industry and government working together. And in OSRL, we've got lots of good experience of incident management system and exercises using a multi-agency approach with a unified command involving the government authority, the responsible party, and maybe the Coast Guard, jointly commanding the effects, the event through that approach. So technology is advancing, but I think the key to future response is about having good, robust organization that's tested through exercises and trained. So
thank you.
That is my last slide. Thank you very much, Samantha.
Thank you very much, Andy, for this very fascinating presentation. We've got now a few minutes for questions. We've got so many questions, so we've had to have a selection here. The first one is from Muralee, and excuse me if I'm going to read it out loud because it's quite long. You spoke about waste. The higher level of development, the greater the generation of waste and the exposure to environmental emergency. Is this mainly due to a shift from people-oriented development to profit or business-oriented development? With such a lesson learned, what are the measures and strategies for the future to make development healthier and more sustainable? I think you're muted, Muralee.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Lakshmi, for this question. Of course, it goes a lot beyond this environmental emergency seminar. But it is true that with increased development, we have more waste produced. And this is really not about people-centered development or business-centered development, but it's just a fact that when we have better economic income in a country, we simply consume more. It's a fact. Increasingly, we also package more. So if every apple is now packaged and then sent for customer. Every piece you buy from online, from Amazon, come with 1 packing, 2 packing, multiple packings. So clearly there is a lot more packing happening. There's a lot less of reuse happening. Pens in the past, 40, 50 years back, was all reused with ink, but now it's all disposable pens. There is very little repairs happening. So when a white good is not functioning well, in the past, they would be repaired again and again. People having 30-year-old radios and televisions and washing machines in their house was common. But now, as soon as something is not functioning, it's discarded. So there are all these issues why the amount of waste is increasing. But there's also realization of this. There is new concept of extended producer responsibility. So there is recognition of polluter pays principle. So as much as the waste is increasing, there are also philosophical shift towards pushing it back to whoever caused the pollution, and therefore the effort to bring the pollution down. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Muralee. We've got another very interesting question from Sanjit to Urs. How does climate change influence regional instability?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. I think if we take as a typical example, we can talk about Sahelian countries. You know, this band from going from Senegal up to Eritrea to the Red Sea is an area of very semi-arid ecosystem, which are very vulnerable. And also what is very important is the local communities, the rural communities, but also the displaced people. If they are displaced people, they highly depend on the natural resources. So if you have now coming to climate change or coming especially to more frequent droughts and maybe also more prolonged droughts, but not only this, also inundation can be more severe. So these disasters can have a tremendous impact on the state of the natural resources. And of course, because the people, as I said, depend on that, they will either leave the area, but on the other side, they can, the fact that there are less intact natural resources, there is also a high conflict potential. And I think the typical example is the Darfur crisis.
And the example that you gave before regarding the project in Chad that SDC ran was also a good example of how this project can bring communities together in areas where there's conflict between hosts and refugees. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, exactly. And I think, I mean, there it was the key focus of this project was to achieve a cohabitation, a peaceful cohabitation between refugees, the Sudanese refugees, and the local communities using the same sources, natural resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Urs. We've got a question now to Esther from Brangeon. Are participating member states bound by any off-site regional emergency plan? And there's another question also for Esther, how to contact the EU for assistance?
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Brijesh and Onkar. I will just start with the second question first. With regards to how to contact the EU for assistance, the request for assistance, as I mentioned, it needs to come from a governmental, from the government, so from a national authority. So this is mostly done through the embassies, so the embassy of the affected country in Brussels, but also it can be done from the field, so where we have some EU delegations around the world and some ECHO offices around the world, which also monitor the projects going on with the humanitarian projects. So this is where the link is mostly done. Then of course there's the request can also come directly to us, to the ERCC. We can share the email in the chat box later, but voilà, most of the time the request for assistance come either from the embassies in Brussels or through the EU delegation or the ECHO colleagues in the field, and of course sometimes through the UN. So this is in terms of the second question. In terms of the first question, the participating states and member states, they're not bound to any off-site regional emergency plan. I mean, again, the Commission here has a support competence. So the member states and the participating states, they are their own sovereignty. So we are here to support them. We are here to advise. We are here to also for example, we co-finance some transport operation if they would like to provide assistance through the mechanism. So provide some incentives for member states and participating states to provide response through the mechanism. But in the end, it is up to the member state and participating state to take the decision on emergency response. That's it from my side.
Thank you, Esther. Oh, there's a question for me. How greening of humanitarian action can be achieved? This is a vast question, and I will invite you to read my my reports, which I mentioned in the first place. But I think I think there's a lot that can be done, like a lot of quick wins, a lot of small actions that can reduce our footprint. And the first one that comes to mind maybe is not to fly, to travel so much. I mean, there was a study recently that was published by Chatham House who mentioned that 40% of the greenhouse emissions of some agencies are linked with international travel. So I think maybe if we could try to fly directly to places instead of stopping over or having conferences at a distance, then it will reduce our footprint. But it is a vast subject, and I invite you to read my reports. We've got time for a few more questions, I guess. To Esther and Muralee from Sanjit, how can remote sensing be used for oil spill applications? Going back to Andy's presentation. Muralee, you want to take that one?
You know, I'm very happy to take it, but probably Andy would like to give it a first go. After that, I can take. I'm happy to take it.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'll take it, certainly. I think remote sensing has a number of applications for oil spill response. I think, you know, we can use infrared, ultraviolet from aircraft and from satellites. Satellite surveillance in particular are particularly useful in showing us the extent of oil on the sea surface. But now, you know, other sort of platforms are also very useful in terms of this. We can use infrared is sort of like using the heat signature, but is typically associated with an oil slick on the surface. Microwave radiation is another sensor that we typically find. So a number of countries, national governments, have in their stockpiles aircraft that are fitted with various sensors that can be used for surveilling an oil spill. So there's plenty of choice out there, I would say.
Thank you, Andy. Muralee, do you want to add something to that? And I have another question also for you. Can we continue to receive latest information on emergency response even after the end of the webinar series?
Thank you, Samantha. Yes, I just want to add to what Andy mentioned, that, you know, when we talk about remote sensing, typically people understand this as satellite-based remote sensing. But in the oil spill, of course, there is aircraft-based surveillance as well. But in the entire domain of environmental emergency response, the use of drones is increasing, which is also a remote sensing technique. And one should imagine that in the coming 10 years, drones would be part of not only detection, but also response to environmental emergencies. You know, you will be able to see drones fighting fires, drones dealing with oil spill and deployment of booms, and drones doing a lot of things. So remote sensing will go a lot beyond just sensing. Regarding your second question, and I think this is a question which everyone would be interested in. Over the period of this webinar series, we have had more than 3,000 people registering for this event. And we had created a Facebook group for these participants, and I think many of you are members of it. We encourage you to continue to be active on that forum, and we would provide secretarial support to that so that we would continue to add information at that site as and when things are happening. But what you can also do is that in case there is something happening, some sort of a disaster happening in your region, please post details of the same, but also please put questions, request for guidance, and it will clearly come, not necessarily from us and not only from us, UN or these participants, but also from other participants. There are many people in this team, in the audience, who also have a lot of specialized knowledge. So yes, this association would continue. As I mentioned, webinar would continue beyond COVID. This community will grow. Hopefully, the environmental emergencies will not grow, but our ability to respond to them would improve. And we all want you to be a part of that community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Muralee, for these closing remarks. And I think we're coming to the end of this webinar now. I want you to thank for attending the whole series. It was a really fascinating discussions. And on my side, it's one of the positive things about this pandemic. I find it great that we can talk to people all around the world. It feels like we're in the same room. It's great. Thank you all for taking part in this webinar, and stay safe. Bye.
Goodbye.